first 48, right? Like, imagine they get all of this information and they get all this evidence and they're like, this connects the person, we got it, we made an arrest, and they go to court. That person alone will tank the case.
Hey there, my name's Ashley Church.
And I'm Erin West.
We were once newly promoted crime scene and latent print supervisors on mutual struggle buses as we both simultaneously tried to navigate through the challenges within our forensic units.
Now we run a business where we create tools and resources that we wish we had had to make these transitions easier. We like to talk about the experiences we've had in the forensic field, the good, the bad, and the ugly, in the hopes to create awareness around these issues and move the needle forward to create positive change in the forensic community.
So if you're a forensic professional, regardless of your years of experience, who's not afraid to dive into real, raw, and sometimes uncomfortable topics, you're in the right place.
This is the Forensics Unfiltered podcast.
Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the last episode with Brianne Breedlove from Uncover Forensics. We have so many other episodes in the queue with Gabrielle Weimer, Michael Kessler, and even Glenn and Eric from Double Loop Podcast. But I wanted to go ahead and publish this episode first, because our guest, Jennifer Mead, will be talking about a webinar she is teaching next week. And just in case you're interested in this topic, I don't want you to miss out on the training. Now, one other thing I want to mention before we dive into shedding the light on the most overlooked high-risk unit. If you haven't heard, we kind of made a big announcement and launched a brand new product called The Vault. We truly believe The Vault is a groundbreaking approach to forensic training. We're really not aware of any other training company that is offering something like this. And it's really truly designed to revolutionize the way you develop your leadership skills and advance in your career, no matter your schedule or budget constraints. Now, since you listened to our podcast, I'm sure you've heard of it, but just in case you haven't and you're wondering what is exactly The Vault, what is this new way of forensic training, we are hosting a free webinar called Charting New Territories, Forensic Training for the Modern Professional, where we are going to share all of the details in a live 30-minute webinar. You can come and ask all of your questions there or just see what The Vault is really all about. Because we know so many of you are in different time zones and work different schedules, we did make sure to add several dates and times that you can choose from to attend the live webinar. And to make things a little bit more exciting, we are hosting a big giveaway for those that attend a live webinar or become members of The Vault. This giveaway is probably one of the biggest giveaways that we've done so far, and it's packed with all of our favorite things. I will go ahead and put the link in the show notes where you can register for this webinar and find out all of the details about this giveaway as well. Can't wait to see you there at the live webinar. But for now, without further ado, let's dive into this episode. Before we start this episode, our guest would like to share a disclaimer that the opinions shared are their own and not representative of their current or past employment. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy.
All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Forensics Unfiltered. We are so excited to have you guys back here today. Thank you for joining us once again. We have a very special guest today, Ms. Jennifer Mead. She is an evidence supervisor at an agency down here in Florida. And we thought, what a great person to come on today and talk about some evidence things, because we think that our evidence peeps out there, they're really sorely neglected. So we thought this would be a popular episode for all of you out there that have to handle evidence, whether you are solely an evidence person or you do evidence and crime scene or evidence, crime scene, and latent prints, like whatever. If you have any parts of the handling, storing, transport, disposal of evidence, this episode is just for you guys. Before we dive into all of those juicy meat and potatoes, Miss Jennifer, if you'll take a minute to introduce yourself to our listeners who are tuning in.
So my name is Jen Mead. As Erin said, I am an evidence supervisor in a local agency here in Central Florida. I have been with the agency and in my role for right at 5 years. And before that, I supervised a unit in child welfare industry. So I did that for about 9 years. I love what I do. I have a sort of small agency. We have 5 staff members that are under us, and we are solely evidence, but we do fall underneath the forensics division. So I'm very fortunate that my team is strictly dedicated to evidence. I am a true Floridian, born and raised right here in Central Florida. So I love my state. But yeah, mom, wife, that's me.
All the things.
Yeah.
And I do think, because this is how I tend to think about evidence units. So when I'm talking to someone about their unit and their processes and procedure, I'm always interested to know the size of their unit, because then it'll give me like some concept of how similar we are, right? So for those of you listening, just for size perspective, when we're talking about some of these things, and we think that the things we're talking about today will be common no matter if you have a tiny unit or a large unit, but our unit has something similar to Jen's. We have 6 members and 1 supervisor, and we have about 200,000 items of evidence in our custody. And Jen, what is yours? Yours is a little bit smaller, but about the same size.
About the same size, yes. So I have 4 full-time, 1 part-time staff member, and we have about somewhere between 115 and we're creeping up to 116,000 items. So it's a lot, but we've been less than 5% increase since I got there. So before I got there, and this is not a humble brag by any means, but here we go. Before I got there, they were grossly understaffed for so long, even less people than I have now. And their rate of incline was in the 20s, sometimes 40% increase in evidence. So we've been able to mitigate that down to a 2 to 3% increase, which is
amazing.
Yeah, that's my team. Yeah. It has nothing to do with me. I just tell them, okay, go, I got you. No matter what happens, I'll cover this. Just do it. Do the things, you know what to do. And
that's really incredible.
So I know I have never worked in an evidence unit. The most that I know is from hearing stuff from Erin, because we obviously talk a lot, and she's part of overseeing the evidence unit now. So many of our listeners have probably no knowledge of working in an evidence unit as well. So what do you think is the biggest misconception about an evidence and property room?
I think the biggest misconception is that we get it, that the process in which we do once the evidence is submitted to us is 1 or 2 steps. And I guess that my brain always goes to a deputy, right? Or a law enforcement officer. They go to a scene, they collect what they deem is important. They put it in a package, a box or whatever. They put some stuff on the outside, they seal it up, they give it to evidence. And for them, their thought process ends there, right? But for us, that item, depending on what it is, can turn into somewhere between 5 to 20 steps for my staff, which means it's not just a one and done. I think the other misconception is that we know what's in everything, right? So like we are the end all be all, but then also we don't have anything to do with the evidence. So that's another big one that I've learned, that you have to very delicately inform people that no, while I didn't go to law school, I do know that the statute says I can't do this, but I can do that. And I need your support to do that. And so a lot of times, and I've noticed it even with our crime scene unit or Layton's, anyone that submits something to us, now they're a little bit more understanding because they work with me all the time. So I'm always like, nope, we can't do that. But it's not something as simple as I got it, I put it on a shelf, and then whenever I deemed it was necessary or right, okay, now I can just get rid of it. I like to think of it as like a spider web. When we get, it turns into this, but if this, then this, and then this, and then it's this huge chart.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
We had started to create, and it's not out in the world yet, but we had started to create flow charts. And of course, Erin's the one's doing this. Like, I just make them pretty. But it's seriously like a spider web of statute of limitations, and every case type is different. And so you have to stay up on the changes that are made every single year to the statute of limitations laws. Like you said, if this, then that. And the fact that an evidence tech just has to have that knowledge stored in their brain is incredible.
Yeah.
And that's also like, I think you bring up a really great point, because I only have crime scene experience. And there were times where I felt like we were collecting, especially like large items.
Yes.
Just for, oh, this would look cool in court.
Yep.
Yeah. So instead of like just swabbing or taking a cutting of a mattress, maybe there's semen or blood on it, they're like, let's just take the whole mattress, not thinking like, hey, someone's going to have to store that. And eventually, like, we're going to run out of space. And then we can't just, decide to get rid of it. There are rules that we have to abide by that says whether or not we can get rid of it.
Well, and not only that, but I also have to audit that item. So I'm going to have to handle that, right? So whatever you give me, whether it's a mattress or a book of matches, I have to touch every single item in our inventory and audit it within a time period. So that being said, be really thoughtful and mindful of how you package said item, because if it sits there for 10, 15 years because it's a homicide or it's a sex assault on a child under 12, that's not going anywhere. And if at any point something happens to the packaging, I'm calling you to fix it. It's not my it's my evidence in the sense that I'm responsible for it, but I'm not responsible for the packaging. And I think that's the other thing, is people are like, just shove all this stuff in this bag and just give it to them. But I also want it processed, and I want it swabbed, and I want it in. Okay, but we have to keep the bag. Like, there's so many rules and parameters that people don't take into consideration. But what I have found, and what is really cool, is that building the relationships with the people that you work with and that are submitting to you is essential, and making sure that you can share with them, hey, look, if you want to put that mattress, or like we had a blow up raft, if you want to put that in a large bag, that would probably work best, because if you wrap it in this butcher paper, you're going to want it swabbed. You may want it going to bio pre-screening. You may want it latent processed to see if somebody else touched it. That paper, which is essentially like real thick Christmas paper, we have to keep it. So make sure you put a little extra paper, because every time we cut it, we've got to keep that package, because you collected it for a reason. You want it to go to court, right? So I've got to keep that bag, because that's going to be, if I were an attorney, that would be the first thing I would ask.
I mean, to be honest, though, not to like knock on anything, but the large items like safes, bicycles, mattresses, in property and evidence units, commonly, I don't even see those wrapped in anything. It's just like has a tag on it. And that's a hard thing to change too. Like, so the deputies and detectives have been collecting it like that for years. So trying to like change that mentality is also probably going to take a long time.
I have found it, and it's funny you say that, because we'll have people that say, well, I just did that yesterday. No, sir, that was 5 years ago. Yeah. And the mattress that you collected it because it was found on the side of the road, which, why are we picking up trash? You don't work for waste management, but okay, whatever.
Amen.
You were ordered to do that. That was very different, because you weren't trying to preserve evidence. So trying to teach people that don't work in the forensics field or don't work in the evidence field, if you want it processed, you have to preserve what you want processed. Like, we get bicycles all the time, but tell me, it's not a matter of like, I got a bike, let's put it in the bike storage spot. Why did we get the bike? Why are you giving it to me? What do you want me to do? And my staff,
they don't always understand why either.
Right. And my staff have to be trained to very tactfully not offend someone, but also figure out, why am I getting this? Should the handlebars be wrapped in butcher paper? Do we need to actually have it? Is it considered a trash, which does not need to be submitted to your evidence unit? Please don't give them trash. Or is it just, we found this, okay, we'll do that process, which then there's a whole nother spider web. But I think, to go back to the question, I think that's one of the biggest misconception, is that I think about it like kids, right? My kids know they have clothes in their closet. They know that they're going to eat. They have no idea at a young age how that meal got to the plate in front of them, right? So they just know, when I come home, I'm going to have dinner. When I wake up, I'm going to have clothes in my closet. But how did those clean clothes get there? There's a whole process that you may not see or be involved with, but don't just assume that it's there. And it's always going to be there.
Yeah. That's a good example. I think I thought I knew what evidence did before I got the evidence unit, because I worked so closely with them, right? In forensics, I had no idea, and I worked closely with them.
Yeah.
So it's no surprise that our chain of command has absolutely no idea what's going on in there, when those of us that work closest with that department have no idea what they're doing. Like, I knew that they didn't just put things on shelves, but I had no idea how complex it is. And I actually believe, because now I oversee the evidence unit, the forensic unit, and the latent print unit.
Mm-hmm.
And of those 3 units, I actually believe that the evidence unit is the highest liability for the department. And I also believe, like, the evidence unit stresses me out more than forensics and more than latent does, because if we're going to get lawsuits, if we're going to lose cases, it's going to come through that department. And I think that people are not even aware of what's going on inside their evidence units in their departments. Like, I think that if chiefs and sheriffs and under chiefs and captains and majors and whatever actually paid attention to those units and really dug in and understood what was going on in there, I think most departments would be pretty alarmed by some of the things that are occurring inside that unit, because nobody pays attention to them. And it's not for any fault of their own. I think the people in the evidence units are really trying, and they're not being supported. There's no funds being pushed that way. There's no training being provided. There's none of that stuff that's happening. So, and we're going to talk about all that in a minute. But just kind of on that topic, I think that evidence personnel don't get called to court very often. And so I've heard a lot of evidence people just be very lackadaisical about having to testify or go to trial, or like, I don't really need to prepare for that. I never get called to trial. Yeah, we just recently made our evidence girls go through moot court with our legal counsel at our department, which is how we do moot court for all of the whole forensic division. Mm-hmm. And some things came out in that were just like wild. What would happen if defense attorneys regularly started calling evidence personnel to testify? What do you think would happen?
Okay, so let me start by saying, every single person that works in my unit has to go through courtroom training. That's the very last task in our training program. But that is one of the things that I'm so grateful that I came from a background working in child welfare. And before that, I worked for a physician, and he was a medical expert witness for the state. And in child welfare, while my position was much more admin than going out and removing children, I still had to go to court, and I got depoed. So we wouldn't go to trial. Like, that was not my role. So I don't want to put that out there. But I was fortunate enough to have my first exposure was the physician I worked for was an expert for the state. So I watched him depot. I watched him say, no, that shouldn't have happened. Right. Let's think about a TV show, right? Like all of these sexy CSI and First 48, right? Like, imagine they get all of this information and they get all this evidence and they're like, this connects the person. We've got it. We made an arrest. And they go to court and they pull up an item and they're like, is this the can that had the defendant's DNA and fingerprints all over it? Why is the can not in a paper bag? Why is it not sealed? Why has it been opened 17 times? And the evidence specialist, if they're not trained on how to answer questions, how to be prepared for, and go back and really study this case that is going to court and say, what was your role? And speaking specifically to their role and how they managed it and how they were able to ensure that they had care and custody of the item, that person alone will tank the case. You don't need a bad ID in latent. You don't need a faulty finding in crime scene for processing. You don't need a law enforcement officer to get up there and say something they're not supposed to, and now they'd have a mistrial and they've got to start. The evidence person alone could 100% tank that entire case. So preparing your staff, and I can't even imagine the staff that are doing dual roles, right? Whether it's evidence and records or evidence and crime scene, or we only have crime scene, but those are the people that go and handle the evidence stuff, right? If you're not answering to a defense attorney or even to the state attorney, the care and custody, and you can show that this item, this particular can, was under such strict security, it was audited, we ensured that nobody else had access to it, the rest does not matter, right? And so I fear that a lot of people don't focus enough on the court side. I can tell you that every single person that's been in our unit that's gone through the courtroom training, when they finish, they're like, now I understand why we have so many rules for disposing of a case. Because God forbid you get rid of something and then it goes to court.
I mean, I can tell you now, if I was a defense attorney, I would call the evidence person every time. Every single time, over forensics and latents, every time I'd call the evidence person. It was amazing, the stuff that came up in moot court. Like, we prepared the girls, it's a module in our training program. Yeah. And we prepared them for testimony, just like we prepare forensics and latents. We met with the attorneys. We provided them the cases that the girls were going to testify on. And it was interesting because we had some forensic girls that were doing moot court as well. And so we gave the evidence girls the same case, because that's how it would normally happen, where they would be called in on a case for someone else's stuff. So they testified to the same case that the forensic girls did. The attorneys really have no idea how evidence functions. We gave them some description of their involvement in the case, but we let them organically come up with things on their own. And some of the stuff they asked, so one of the girls had to transport some of the evidence to FDLE, right? And so they asked her, did you stop for lunch? Did you stop on the way back? Did you ever leave that evidence unattended? Things like that we probably don't think about ever. Like, yeah, I went through the Chick-fil-A drive-through with the evidence in the car, There was a question. They went through every single storage location and asked them, why do you keep this in the biohazard area? Why do you keep this in the vault? Why do you keep this here? Why do you keep this there? And then ask them if they could explain, like, are you storing it in a way that doesn't cross-contaminate things? Well, one of the girls brought up, I don't even remember how it came up, but she brought up condensing. And I don't know if that's a common term for all departments, but essentially what we mean by condensing is that as we purge things, like, space opens up. Yep. So then we shift things back to open up like full storage areas. So that was what she meant by condensing. And so he was so alarmed by the word condensing. And he was like, well, certainly you don't mean that you like smash a bunch of things into a bin. Like, are you smashing things into a bin? And so then she had to sit on the stand and try to explain what condensing meant. And to be honest, sometimes they do. Sometimes they are like smashing this into a bin. And then he was like, well, doesn't that compromise the integrity of the evidence?
It sure does.
Right. And he's like, well, are you smashing things into bins before you send it to forensics to be processed? Like, how do you know you didn't smash it into a bin before you sent it to forensics? Like, are you taking DNA and prints off? And it went down this whole rabbit hole of things. And I think most of us could sit there and fall into that trap if you're not prepared. If if they really understood what was going on in the processes and could ask just the right questions. They asked them about certification. Are you certified? Why or why not? What does the certification entail? Like all of those kinds of things. It was a really good experience, but I think a lot of people would be like, oh my gosh, if they had that happen to them on the stand.
It's funny because I love hearing that. I have found that when we get called to depo, while it doesn't happen often, if the defense attorneys knew what to ask, they would call us every day.
You'd be in trouble.
So they're more interested in when you collected it, when you found it, where was it, who was it on, who was there? And it's like, that's important. That's part of it. But you guys haven't even tapped into that there's a whole nother layer, but they don't know what to ask. When we do ours, we ask for our state attorneys to assist us, right? And then we'll have a subject matter expert, meaning another coworker, ask these questions, which is really awkward and uncomfortable because naturally your coworker is not going to feel comfortable being like, so, and asking, they know what to ask, but they're not going to. So I think that if the defense attorneys or even the state attorney's office knew what to ask, that would be an absolute game changer for this field. Would impact crime scene and latents too.
And the whole agency. So I think that would make the agency really think differently about the evidence unit. I think, honestly, their perception, and I don't think it's ill-willed or ill-intentioned. I truly think it's lack of education. But like Erin said, it's truly the highest liability department in the entire agency. And I think it would take something like that for them to really take it seriously and to give them the support and the training that they need and the education and the tools and stuff like that. So keeping that in mind, in what ways do you think evidence teams are not being supported right now?
I think you guys touched on it a couple of times. One, it's a lack of understanding. And honestly, it starts from the supervisor or whoever is overseeing evidence needs to have a real thorough, in-depth, comprehensive understanding of what their staff are doing. Then it goes all the way up the chain. And I truly believe that if the sheriff knew or your chief knew what was going on or the potential, a potential risk that could be out there, they would have a lot more questions. Now, I'm not ignorant to the fact that the sheriff and the chief, regardless of the size of your agency, do not have the time to go into every department and then every unit and ask questions that should be handled by your chain of command, which is where that chain is so crucial. If you don't have the support from your chain, meaning they know what you do, why you do it, when you do it, they don't need to know how. Like I don't personally think that my director or my chief needs to know what the process and policies for when we receive a gun, right? He doesn't need to know how many reports we run, how many logs we have for it, what the location is. It doesn't matter. He needs to know that the people below him and the people overseeing this unit have it covered. I think that a lot of times, whether you have an agency that you've got a forensics bubble, right? So often, and Erin, you touched on it earlier, you think you know because you're so close. Like you work with them every day. And there's something wrong with me because I do get little when I hear someone from crime scene go, wait, you guys do that? Why? Or latent come over and they're like, well, I didn't know you guys did that. And so I'm like, thank you. For some reason, in some weird twisted way, that's a compliment for me. But I think more often than not, your chain of command have no idea what you're doing in evidence. They don't know what is supposed to happen, even at a macro level, right? I don't need you to know those little tiny nuances and all of the steps in the spider webs that we mentioned earlier. But I need you to understand that it is not a one and done. There's a difference between what's written in policy and then how policy is applied, right? The application is sometimes very different, more detailed than what's on paper. The other thing that has been absolutely, it's cringy, right? It makes me so irritated. There's no training. We get nothing. No. There's 2 organizations out there that are evidence specific, right? And one is a state and one is an international. When I tell you I sat on this training and they said, make sure you put a case number on the items, and then spent 27 minutes in one of these modules talking about all of these different organizations that have stolen something from evidence. That doesn't help. I know there are thieves out there. I work in law enforcement. I'm not stealing something. And I also know that I need to put a case number on this item, because how the hell am I going to know what it is? Right? Like it just felt so duh.
Yeah.
And when I looked for training, I was looking for an attorney, or I even went to some of the universities and said, all right, you guys have a law school. Can we get some of your students? Would it be possible for them to sit with my staff and tell them and explain some of these statutes that seem their pages, right? The subsections go to like ZZ, right? So explain to us. I don't speak legalese. And so that's not available. There's no training, because no attorney on this planet is going to say a blanket statement. And more often than not, we kind of sort of need just build the parameters for us, but there's no training and there's no one willing to step out on the ledge and say, this is how I do it. This is why I do it. Take what you can from what I do and apply it to your agency. And by the way, these are your external stakeholders. You need their buy-in. And I think that if we had more training, I think if we had more staff, we are grossly understaffed. And I know in my agency, years ago, I'm talking early 2000s, right? So 20 plus years ago, no one is there anymore. So I'm not pooping on anybody. They put the wrong people in there. I've seen pictures. I've read IAs. I've seen the memos that say, you did what? No, absolutely not. And then you have to compensate these people, right? Like, if you understand what they do, why they do it, the risk that are involved, it's a no-brainer that these people get paid more money, but it just doesn't happen.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I've had discussions with my chain of command because our evidence people get paid less than our records people. And so that's like an argument we've been having right now, because I'm like, besides the fact that they're considered high risk, they're doing a high liability task. Like, they also are exposed to chemicals, biohazards. They respond to scenes like the forensic girls do. I mean, there's a variety of things that they're doing in that job function that the records people will never be exposed to, and yet they get paid less than them. We're hinging the integrity of the entire department's evidence on the functioning of these staff members, and we pay them shit.
Yeah, pennies. So I had a moment, and I brought it up, and I was politely told to sit down and know my place. So when I found out my first trip to Buc-ee's, and they had this cute little sign out front, and it's like those folding signs, and I saw the amount that their staff, not assistant managers, not store managers, a shop clerk makes more than my staff that have to handle approximately 20 guns a week, kilos of fentanyl that we can prove, coming back from tox or from chemistry, it is pure. And for that to walk by it every day, and I can make more money putting gum on the shelf at Buc-ee's, why would anyone work there?
Yeah.
What is the, like,
Preach.
oh, well, they have great benefits, and their retirement's wonderful. Well, that's great.
Or if you can make it 30 years.
I'm 40. I'm not thinking about retirement. I'm thinking about tomorrow. I'm thinking about my team. And this is such a forensics in general is such a phenomenal field, right? Like there's so many possibilities. And I truly believe that we've just started to tap into the potential of where scientifically where this field could go, right? The advancements are still growing, right? They're still there. Why aren't we doing the same thing with evidence? Why aren't we doing and giving them the same attention when you have this item, right? We'll use the can again. It is crucial. You're telling me this can is the smoking gun to your case, and then you're going to give it to somebody that you don't value, you don't support, you don't trust, and you don't compensate. Make it make sense. It just...
Reach, girl, reach.
Look, you got me up with soapbox.
I love it. I love it. I literally think this is going to have to be a whole part 2 because I think that we could dive so deep into like all the things she just touched on, the general lack of understanding, lack of staffing, selection of people that are appropriate for that kind of unit, funding. I mean, we had, when I took over that unit, their training budget was minuscule, like not enough to send for sure anyone to training, like maybe a training. But then also they were working with all of this broken equipment, like we have the huge rolling shelves. Yeah. Like they didn't roll anymore. They were broken, like literally sitting there, broken bins, broken tubs, broken carts, like whatever. Yeah. Or like duct taping stuff together. And I'm like, guys, what is going on? Throw it away. Like throw it away. We'll buy new stuff. Like there was no money being pushed to that department. Yeah. There was equipment, like large equipment, like freezers and things that desperately needed to be purchased and replaced. And, you know, it had always kind of been in the past, like, oh, well, that's too expensive of a thing to ask for. Like, no, y'all need it. Their desk spaces, they had 7 people working in there and 4 cubicles. So they made like 3 like janky desk spaces. And I'm like, no, like y'all need a space to work. Like, yeah, it was crazy. There was so much stuff. So I feel like if you guys have really enjoyed this topic, like leave a comment below because I feel like we could dive so deep into a part 2. If our evidence people are like, hell yes, I feel this pain. Let's talk about it some more. You guys let us know. But one of the things we're super excited about that's coming up, Jen has come on as one of our evidence instructors. And one of the things she talked about was just kind of a general lack of training. And that's really why Gap Science started offering evidence stuff, because I started looking for training and I couldn't find anything anywhere. And like she mentioned, you know, some of the organizations that I saw out there that offered classes, like I wanted a deep dive into evidence and I needed it ASAP. You know, I took over that unit. I was like, okay, I need to go to a class so that I can learn all the parts and pieces. And I saw some of those like, you know, 1-2 day classes out there. Yeah. And I was like, this isn't enough like for me to know everything I need to know. So here at Gap Science, we've started designing all kinds of evidence courses based on the feedback we've been getting from you guys. So we have all kinds of stuff out there so far, stuff for purging, stuff for audits, how to do releases, all of that stuff. Well, Jen is super passionate about purging and she loves purging and all the purging things. And so we've had this idea of you guys telling us the things that you have in your units that are like, how do I get rid of this? Yeah, Jen's going to create classes for it. So the first one she has coming up is purging currency, where she's going to go through all the currency things. But the next one we kind of talked about was like essentially like human remains. We hear so many people that are like, I have bone, I have tissue, I have fetuses, I have urns with ashes in them. Like, what the hell do I do with these things? Yeah. So we talked about that. But Jen, I haven't talked to you about this. The last evidence class I taught, people were like, I have, someone had an airplane engine. Someone had,
I got that.
Yeah, someone had like 100 kegs with beer in them. Like they were throwing out all kinds of wild and crazy things, like all kinds of like casino machines and stuff like that. So if you guys have weird, crazy things, Jen's going to start making some just little regular webinars about like, I have this weird thing. How do I get rid of it?
I love it.
I love it.
Yeah, we've had cars, catalytic converters. I've got jet skis, and then we have 500 gambling machines I'm currently in the middle of that rough. And then I had a case where someone was going around and stealing a bunch of alcohol, and I think we counted 400 bottles of liquor and 200 cases of beer. But the kegs would be fun. That'd be an interesting one. But
Yeah. So tell them before we hop off, tell them just a little bit about your Purging Currency webinar that's coming up.
So I'm very excited, and thank you both for asking me to join. I couldn't be more honored. So this training is going to be what and how do you do with the money that you get in your unit, right? We're always so focused on high liability items, and one of those is money, right? So when do you deposit money? How do you get rid of money? Like, I can't give it to someone, or can you? What about electronic currencies? So cryptocurrency is a thing. And if you guys are not tapping into the cryptocurrency world, you're leaving $3 million in the last 2.5 years. My agency has successfully forfeited or recovered, right? And we've been able to make a victim whole. And oftentimes these are the elderly or our most vulnerable population, right? So that's a really cool situation. And we did get a really neat shout out from from the state who my agency partnered with and really helped kind of format that process for them. Foreign currency, what do you do with that? So there's a whole slew of money. And what about ripped, buried, burned? That whole, like, the gangsters bury money or they burn it. But what do we do with it? Like, the bank's not going to take it, and it just sort of sits in a safe. But there's something that you can do with it, and you can get that money to your agency, and then it can go to your general revenue. So if you guys like that idea and you're interested, like, come on, let's join my training. We'll do this. We'll talk about
I love that. Yes. So join us for Jen's webinar. And also, like, if you are enjoying Forensics Unfiltered, make sure that you are subscribing to the podcast, rate this podcast. And like Erin mentioned before, in the comment section, if you're on like Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we would love to know, A, do you want a part 2? And B, if there's something that you're trying to get rid of that you think would be a great webinar, make sure to include that in the comments below. We do read every single one. And that is how we're going to come up with more ideas for future webinars.
Well, thank you so much for joining us here today, Jen. We'll let you know if the request for a part 2 come in. And thank you guys for joining us once again for another episode of Forensics Unfiltered. We will see you at the next one. Bye, guys.
Thank you so much for being here and listening to Forensics Unfiltered. If you liked this episode, would you do us a favor and leave a review letting us know specifically what you liked about this topic? It will only take a minute, but it will really help us plan future episodes so we can bring you more topics that you want to listen to. We'll be sure to provide any links from today's episode in our show notes on our website. Head to www.gapscience.com. Until next time, stay safe out there.